Good evening, everyone. If those that would like to help lead songs tonight could please come on up. We'll start our worship off this evening with number 79, When Trials Come. If you would all be so kind as to stand. You guys may be seated for our next song, which will be number 35, O Great God. just across the pages to number 198. We'll sing Across the Lands. And for our last song, if you would please stand, this one will be just on the screen. You may be seated.
Now you want me to start over? So you simplified everything when they did everything digital and then moved that up front, so makes it so much better. He kept turning me up and he couldn't figure out why he wasn't getting any louder, huh? Thought I was whispering. Political debates, they're asked a question and their response indicates either they didn't hear the question, or they don't know the answer to the question, or they don't care. They're just going to say whatever they want to say. There's an advantage to that. Imagine going in to take final exams, and you get to write the questions. How would you do? If you ask questions that you don't know the answers to, you deserve to fail. Let's just leave it at that. But if you narrow it to questions that you know the answers to, you'll do quite well. I kind of feel as if Elihu doesn't give Job a fair shake here in this portion of the text, and kind of does something very similar to that, in a sense. Job 34. Then Elihu answered and said, "Hear my words, you wise men. Give ear to me, you who know. For the ear tests words as the palate tastes food. Let us choose what is right. Let us know among ourselves what is good. For Job has said, I am in the right, and God has taken away my right. In spite of my right, I am counted a liar. My wound is incurable, though I am without transgression. What man is like Job, who drinks up scoffing like water, who travels in company with evildoers and walks with wicked men? For he has said, it profits a man nothing that he should take delight in God. Therefore hear me, you men of understanding. Far be it from God that he should do wickedness, and from the Almighty that he should do wrong. For according to the work of a man, he will repay him, and according to his ways, he will make it befall him. Of a truth, God will not do wickedly, and the Almighty will not pervert justice. Who gave him charge over the earth? And who laid on him the whole world? If he should set his heart to it, and gathered to himself his spirit and his breath, all flesh would perish together, and man would return to dust. If you have understanding, hear this. Listen to what I say. Shall one who hates justice govern? Will you condemn him who is righteous and mighty? Who says to a king, worthless one, and to nobles, wicked man? Who shows no partiality to princes, nor regards the rich more than the poor? For they are all the work of his hands. In a moment they die. At midnight the people are shaken and pass away, and the mighty are taken away by no human hand. For his eyes are on the ways of a man, and he sees all his steps. There is no gloom or deep darkness where evildoers may hide themselves, for God has no need to consider a man further, that he should go before God in judgment. He shatters the mighty without investigation, and sets others in their place. Thus, knowing their works, he overturns them in the night, and they are crushed. He strikes them for their wickedness in a place for all to see, because they turned aside from following him, and had no regard for any of his ways, so that they caused the cry of the poor to come to him. And he heard the cry of the afflicted. When he is quiet, who can condemn? When he hides his face, who can behold him? Whether it be a nation or a man. That a godless man should not reign, that he should not ensnare the people. For has anyone said to God, I have borne punishment, I will not offend anymore? Teach me what I do not see. If I have done iniquity, I will do it no more. Will he then make repayment to suit you, because you reject it? For you must choose, and not I. Therefore, declare what you know. Men of understanding will say to me, and the wise man who hears me will say, Job speaks without knowledge. His words are without insight. Would that Job were tried to the end, because he answers like wicked men. For he adds rebellion to his sin. He claps his hands among us and multiplies his words against God. Lord, give us insight into the text. Give us wisdom in our interactions with others. Help us to be careful and not negligent of only listening, hearing partially, and responding. Help us that as the need arises, we would be careful to give wise counsel, comfort, rather than condemnation as necessary. Teach us. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. So Elihu takes a second stab, or at least what he sees as Job's kind of second round of arguments, and he goes after him. And as you may have noticed, the first portion of this text, what he sees, a complaint against Job that the friends never were able to answer. He was wrong, but they couldn't give an answer, and left it. So notice he's primarily speaking to Job, but that begins in verse 16 and following. If you look at the first 15 verses, he addresses, I believe, the three, and perhaps any others that happen to be sitting around there listening as well. Verse 2, hear my words, you wise men. Obviously, notice the plural. And verse 10, therefore hear me, men of understanding. And also, the end of verse 2 where he says, you who know, that's plural as well. So he's dealing with plural. He's dealing with more than just one. So obviously, at least in my opinion, he's focusing in on the three that were negligent to answer the question. And you, by the way, is plural all the way through the first 15 verses. Once we get to verse 16, and he says, if you have understanding, it's singular. And singular the rest of the chapter. So he kind of deals with the three again, kind of says, you worthless bunch of no good guys that think you're wise. You complained, didn't think he was right, but you couldn't prove him wrong, and so enough of you. And then he focuses on Job. However, what I tend to see here tonight, first of all, is selective argumentation. Elihu, not to put him down too hard, but he is mostly helpful. Compared to the other three, he's well-intended. You know anybody that's that really desires to help, but they're really no help at all? They really want to help, but it'd be best if they just observed, right? Elihu does want to help, and I think he does for part of the time. Again, he's not refuted by God for what he says, though the other three are. But he doesn't give Job a fair shake. My kids were younger. I don't know if you have ever encountered anything like this, and it's not just with our kids, it's with anybody that comes and gives you a complaint. I see it riding with the state police all the time. You've got a complaint and you hear a story, and they're trained well enough. They take most of it seriously, but with a grain of salt at the same time until they check it out, right? With the kids, one of the things that may happen on occasion is there would be an incident, and when they're little and someone would come upset, and as a parent you want to find out what's going on. So you ask, what happened? Obvious question. And anytime the answer began with, well, they, I said, just stop right there. Start at the beginning and tell me what happened. Well, they, no. Start at the beginning. Because inevitably, if that's how the conversation began, they're only interested in one side of the story. The side of the story that made them look somewhat innocent, mostly innocent, at least enough to get off the hook this time, and the other one to be more in the wrong, right? When police officers investigate situations, particularly between various parties that all engage in drug activity, you don't just get two different sides of the story when you talk to two. You get completely different narratives, not just two different sides of the same story. That happens sometimes. Again, politicians are known for that. They don't answer the question they don't want to answer. They're at times ask a question that could make them look bad if they answered it honestly. They don't want to do that, so they just give the answer that they want to do. They share snippets of truth. Political ads are already out there. And what do? They take tiny little bits that some are true, some actually anymore aren't necessarily, don't have to be, but some of them might be, but they're tiny little fragments of truth. And they are put in a completely different context, or they're manipulated and twisted in order to say something else. Mostly misleading. If you notice down through the text on a number of occasions, that Elihu quotes Job. He takes statements of Job. Look at verse 9. For he has said, it profits a man nothing that he should take delight in God. Did he say that? Yes. But he said a whole lot more in the same context as that. Notice verse 5. You back up even more. Job has said, I am in the right, and God has taken away my right. Yes, he did say that. He did contend for his integrity. He continued to argue that, even to this point with Elihu. And he does admit, under recognizing that God is sovereign, that God's the one that took away what he has lost. So, yes, Job said that. You can twist that, you can manipulate it, you can make it sound worse than it really is. Job did claim that he was innocent and yet knew that God had done this. And notice what he says. In spite of my right, verse 6, I am counted a liar. Not by God. He's counted a liar by the friends that say, obviously you must be in the wrong because otherwise God wouldn't do this. Because God wouldn't pervert justice. And he adds, my wound is incurable, though I am without transgression. In other words, I'm at a point, Job says, where there is no hope. It's that bad. And I don't deserve it. And it profits nothing that he should delight in God. Well, the wicked get punishment. That's what they deserve. Notice how that unfolds. A wicked man, for according to the work of man, verse 11, he will repay him. According to his ways, he will make it befall him. So, if you do good, good comes your way. If you don't, well, guess what, Job? Obviously, you deserve this. But Job has declared that he's innocent, and yet he suffered, and so he concludes this: there's no benefit. There's no benefit in the sense that wicked people suffer, righteous people suffer. That's Job's point. That's where Job is headed with that. That's his single conclusion. But Elihu basically summarizes Job's thoughts with just the statement, it profits a man nothing that he should take delight in God, and feels successful that his argument is going to silence Job. He thinks he's refuting Job's position. What we see next is really, it's when you do that, you end up with a straw argument, a straw man argument. It's really that if you take an exam, you ask the questions, you should know the answers. It should be easy. Elihu kind of does that. And to me, he reduces his credibility a little bit here. But it's interesting because even though he does that, he is defending what Job would defend. And I'll comment on this again. If you're sitting there watching this conversation, they needed a mediator. They needed somebody to step in, somebody that had some sense to step in and say, just wait a second, guys. You're kind of on the same page here. You really are. Why are you making it look like you're opposed to each other? Because you're taking little bits. And that's not uncommon in relationships for that sort of thing to happen. Sometimes they go for help, and I'm an arbiter or someone who listens in, counselor, sorts through and gets the full side of both and says, you guys aren't really that far apart. You're seeking to defend the same thing, really. Elihu does that in my mind. He exclaims here, it's unthinkable that God would do wrong. Far be it from God that he should do wickedness, and from the Almighty that he should do wrong. Verse 10. That almost sounds like a quote that Job would say, doesn't it? There's no difference here. They're really more on the same page than it seems. Job, however, had simply and accurately stated that even though he was innocent, God had brought these things upon him, resulting in his current condition and loss. That he had not benefited from his integrity before God in the sense of his health, his possessions, his family, all of which he lost. Elihu, look at verse 12, he continues. Of a truth, God will not do wickedly. The Almighty will not pervert justice. Elihu is defending the nature of God. He's saying God can't do wrong. God can only do that which is just. And Job's going to agree with him here. Job doesn't respond right away. And I kind of wonder what's going through Job's mind. Because if I were Job at this point, I'd be saying, why are you yelling at me? Because I agree with you. Why do you think you're trying to beat this into my head? I'm on the same page. I get it. I understand what you're saying. And I don't disagree. I think Job would agree with Elihu. And even as he continues, Job would still agree. Who gave him charge over the earth? Verse 13. Who put God in charge? Who put God in charge? One of our frustrations over the last number of years, we've seen a lot of activity in various levels of government, organization, from those who have been appointed, not elected. Does that sound like a familiar conversation? You've got those that are appointed, not elected. And the argument there is they're not elected by the people, they're not accountable to the people, they're rogue. Well, that can be true. The problem is they're appointed. And in essence, they should be accountable to the one that appointed them. Unfortunately, what happens in the political arena is most often they appoint pawns that are going to do what they want them to do, so they're fine with it. That's the issue. But when you come to God, and I think Elihu's right in asking the question. It lays it right out there. Who put God in charge? Who made him Lord? Who said, okay, you can be God? Nobody. Nobody. He is God, which means he's not accountable to anybody. He's not accountable to anyone. He can do as he chooses. Notice, if he should set his heart to it, gather to himself his spirit and his breath, he could do whatever he wants. All flesh would perish together and man would return to dust. If God determines to do it, he can do it. And there's no one to whom he's accountable that can say, you're not allowed to do that. No one appointed him. He is Lord. He's the one who gave life to all. He's not accountable. So he can do what pleases him. But notice that follows on the previous statements. He will not do wrong. He can't do wickedness. He can only do justice. Job would agree with that. Job would agree with Elihu that even though he is not accountable to anyone, he can do whatever he pleases. He always does that which is fully within the parameters of his divine nature. In other words, he can't do wrong. He will always be as he is. The problem, I think, with Elihu here in the text, as I see it, is the danger of a few degrees. The danger of a few degrees. If you're a ship's captain and you're off by just a couple degrees, it can make all the difference in the world. It can make the difference whether you navigate safely through the harbor or whether you run aground. Just a few degrees. And I think he's off just a few degrees here in his assessment. The reason is because he bases his assessment on a limited portion of Job's conversation rather than the whole. And as a result, his assessment is false, and his rebuke is dangerous. I haven't seen too many political ads, but I can, most all that I have seen have been against a lady running for governor of the state of Michigan. She is being imaged as a mean, uncaring, horrible, evil person because she defends life of the unborn. I don't know if you've seen any of those ads. They take little snippets of what she said that are true, and they're packaging and making it look like she is this horrible, uncaring, evil person. The irony is strong there, isn't it? Do you see the irony in that? It's those fighting for the legal right for a mother to kill her own child who are calling the one who is seeking to save the life of the child mean and uncaring. Talk about a mixed up world. If you're off just a little bit, you can end up at a completely wrong location. Elihu has some strong words for Job, words that I believe miss the mark because his assessment of Job is limited to only a portion of what Job said. He doesn't really hear Job, not in his entirety. He hears portions of what Job says and he responds to that. Look at verses 7 through 9. What man is like Job, who drinks up scoffing like water? Who is there like Job? He's accusing Job. Job, you have sat here listening to these three accuse you of wrong, and you're unfazed. It's like it's water and you just drink it down and it has no effect on you whatsoever. So he perceives Job has accused God of wrong or injustice. And Job hasn't. He's continued to uphold the nature and character of God, the sovereignty of God, the justice of God. He just doesn't understand it. He doesn't understand how God could do what he did. He wants to get to the bottom of it and understand what kind of justice this is that is different from the justice that Job is thinking of. And didn't Job initially respond with, "The Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord"? Elihu continues on his concern that Job is dangerously close to turning on God when he states that there's no difference. You can do right, you can do evil, doesn't matter, you're still going to end up in the same boat. So that's not quite what Job was saying. Yes, both the righteous and the wicked can be blessed. Both the righteous and the wicked can deal with hardship and suffering. Job was not saying it didn't matter how you lived. He was saying, in terms of these particular results, it may not make a difference. But to Job, it did matter how you lived. He continued to fiercely uphold his integrity before God, to maintain it, not just try to argue and defend it. Again, I think Elihu held much of the same thought as Job. They both maintained the sovereignty of God. They both upheld the justice of God. They both would argue that God is always going to do right, that he's never going to do wrong. He does hit on one thing, though. It does seem as though Job is beginning to be impatient. Well, it's easy to be here and accuse Job of being impatient with God's timing and working these things out, right? Because we would never be that impatient with God, would we? God can take his sweet time and respond to our cries whenever he chooses. Sure, there's a human aspect here. And I think Job is beginning to be impatient. And I think what Elihu says, if Job can just sort out all of the rest of it and listen to the parts that they absolutely agree on, it'd be a good reminder for Job that God is sovereign, God is just. And so even though I'm frustrated that it's taking so long for him to do what I think is just, I know he's going to do what's just, and he's going to do what's right. It would be helpful for Job to be reminded of that. That's why I said I think if someone stepped in and moderated this conversation, helped Elihu see that Job would very much agree with his perspective on God, there'd be no need for the harsh things that he says in the end. Elihu's speech ends in a way that sounds horrible. And the reason it sounds horrible is I think it is. Because he's just a couple degrees off. He's just skewed a very little bit. Would that Job were tried to the end, because he answers like wicked men. Elihu is slightly off course. And he assumes that Job needs to understand more about God. He does not see that Job would agree with him on the rightness of God, the goodness of God, the justice of God. And because he's off just a little bit, he thinks Job needs some major education about the nature of God, and the only way for Job to get that is more suffering. It sounds horrible, and in a sense it is. I'll give Elihu the benefit of the doubt here. I don't think intentionally as the other three. I mean, they didn't care how much Job suffered as long as they looked right in the end. That's all they were concerned about. Elihu, I think, is legitimately concerned about Job, but he desires for Job to be tested more because he thinks that will help him. Would that Job were tried to the end, because he answers like wicked men. Thinking Job is way off course. Elihu wanted to see him get back on course, and so wishes that he would suffer to the extent necessary to make that happen. But it seems to me that Elihu is the one that's slightly off. Relationships can be tricky things, can't they? Working with others that we care about can be interesting. Let us be careful in our assessment of others, that we might in love guide well. Listen carefully. Think carefully. Think if Elihu had a friend come alongside and put their arm on his shoulder and say, hey, back up for just a second, and add a few more quotes of Job, I think he would see that Job agrees with him on just about everything that he says in this speech, with the exception of hoping that the suffering will continue, because that's what Job wants to see come to an end, and he is getting impatient with it. So Elihu's words, if Job could sort that out of the mix, could be helpful. But how much better it would have been if he wouldn't have had to sort it all out from all of the rest. Let's be careful, wise, that we might be helpful and lovingly guide others when God gives us opportunity. Would you stand with me as we close tonight in prayer? Lord, teach us, help us even in our interpersonal interactions, the opportunities we have to seek to be a blessing in the lives of others. I think Elihu genuinely cared for Job, and yet wasn't always as helpful as perhaps he intended to be. Help us to be wise and thoughtful and careful, that we might be a blessing, that I trust we truly desire to be. May we live in faithful obedience. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.